So here's how it works. You take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up in your bed, and you believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you listen to Thrive Loud, and Lou shows you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Would you like to learn from those that are taking their lives, their businesses, and their passions to the next level? Best-selling author of Speakeasy and master connector Lou Diamond is here to connect you to some of the most inspiring and amazing people on this planet. Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
You can come through if you want to. I won't call, but I wouldn't stop you. Got your name running through my veins, but I need to move on soon.
Welcome, everyone, to another spectacular episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting into the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond, and today on Thrive Loud, we have an expert on inclusion and diversity. She's a TEDx and inspirational speaker and an award-winning nonprofit leader. She was born with a limb difference and speaks to companies on issues of equity and belonging, the gifts of being unique, and the freedom of accepting your differences. Her latest book, Singlehandedly, Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection, is one you will all want to pick up after this episode. Thrive Loud listeners, I bring you Ruth Rathblott. Ruth, how are you today?
I am great. I'm excited to be here with you, Lou, and so appreciate the opportunity to share my story, but also with your listeners, be able to thrive loud.
You see, you're already on brand, you're already on point, and we're going to have a great conversation right out of the gate, Ruth. And from the first time I met Ruth, she is as confident and fun as you're going to learn on this episode in every conversation you have. So here's what I want to do. I want to kind of rewind a little bit. I guess we could go back all the way to the womb because this might be one of those instances where we do. So let's start from the very beginning, bring everybody up to speed, and help people understand how what you're doing now became your gig.
Sure. And it does go back to the womb because I was born in the days before sonograms. And so my mother had a very healthy pregnancy. And literally on June 26th, out comes this little girl, and she's missing her left hand. She's missing a limb. And it was not only the days before sonograms, but it was also the days when doctors didn't have a lot of information about what this was or even had seen a lot of it before. And so luckily my parents were in the hospital nurse room, and a nurse came up and said, "You'll take this little girl home, you'll love her, and you'll treat her as you would any other child. You'll treat her as normal." And while that sounds like really great advice, because that's exactly what my parents did, I tried everything from skiing to windsurfing to sailing. One of the things that was missing in that equation, Lou, was the ability to talk about it and to express feelings and to talk about my difference. Because growing up with a disability is something that is different and it is challenging. And so while we didn't talk about it, what I learned to do was to hide and to mask not only just the feelings, but to literally physically hide my hand so that people would think I was quote unquote normal, that I was born with two hands. And instead, as we know, I was born with only one. And I started hiding my hand when I was 13 years old. I was heading to a new co-ed high school. And I remember getting on that bus that day, checking the other kids out as we do when we're teenagers. Would I have friends? Would I like people? Would they like me? And someone stared just a little bit too long. And what I did in reaction to that stare was I tucked my little hand into the front left pocket of my jeans, just what was going to be for that bus ride. And as I got to the school, I got off the bus and I said to myself, it's okay to hide it just a little bit more, just make friends. And that hiding from that first day lasted that first week, lasted that first year. I kept telling myself, when you go back the next year, you'll stop hiding because now you have friends. And I kept hiding, and I actually hid, Lou, for 25 years of my life. I hid my hand from everyone.
Ruth, and by the way, thank you for sharing the story. And I find it really interesting because I know we're gonna segue into inclusion in our conversation here. And I do recognize, it was like kids could always be the cruelest in certain ways on whatever it might be. I will not be able to comparatively be able to be empathetic to sit in your shoes and understand what that was like. But I'm going to try and ask the question. Obviously, there's not only a feeling of hiding, but I would love to know what you shortchanged yourself with by hiding this during those years. Because I think helping people understand that and other people who can relate to it might also be a way to kickstart the conversation and understanding the benefits you've gained from it. So can we do that? What did you lose out on by hiding?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think the difficult part about hiding, and I'll say the hiding was very personal. And I think the personal is often universal, and hiding, what I've come to find is that hiding is universal. Many of us are hiding parts of ourselves. And what happens when we hide, and what happens when I hid, is I lost out on the first piece, enjoying my life, because it stopped me from doing things. It made me second guess or constantly worry about, would someone find out? So I was constantly overcompensating, overachieving so that people wouldn't find out about my hand. So there's that exhaustion piece that comes from overachieving. The second is it stopped me, and it didn't allow me, it prevented me from connecting with people in really authentic ways. So that connection piece, when you don't have that, there's a sense of loneliness because you're never really connecting with people because, again, you're always worried they're going to find out and that they won't like you, that they'll judge you, that they'll reject you. And so that piece of my life, I would say it prevented me from enjoying my life. Yeah. And I think that's what happens to most people when they hide is they stop living their life because they're so worried someone's going to find out.
Ruth, what triggered yourself to not want to hide it anymore? What happened in your life or in your surroundings that you gave a time frame of how long it was at that point? What was the event that took place that maybe made you awaken and recognize the importance of showing everybody else what you didn't want to hide, what you shouldn't be hiding, to your point?
I think to that question, Lou, there's two pieces to it. There's a personal piece of how I learned to unhide, and then there's a professional piece of how I learned to unhide. And I'll say with the personal piece, it was allowing someone in. I invited someone in to teach me how to start to actually look at my hand, how to accept it. How I had spent so many years, Lou, with my hand in my pocket, not looking at it, neglecting it, not even recognizing it as part of me, that it took someone coming into my life and me inviting them in to show me how to touch it, how to look at it, how to actually take care of it. I had spent so many years not just hiding it and neglecting it, but that my hand, my little hand, got frostbite every year. I didn't know that I should keep it warm. And so that was a piece of me that I didn't accept as my whole self. And so it was allowing someone in to show me how to love that part of myself that I really deemed unlovable for so long. And so when that person came into my life, I started to love and almost accept that part of myself. I started then to kind of take off the blinders that had been on and started to see other people who had differences similar to mine. I was in a drugstore in Manhattan, and I'll never forget, it was as I was starting to think about my hand and what had been going on for so many years. And I was in this drugstore and I looked over and I noticed somebody with my same hand. And I approached them, and I never, ever wanted to talk to anybody and I really pretended like I'd never seen anyone with one hand or limb difference or even different. And so I went over and talked to this woman. And as I was talking to her, I realized I wasn't alone in my hiding. I didn't realize that she too had gone through similar things. And by the end of the conversation, Lou, she said, well, there's a whole group of us out there. There's a Facebook group and a nonprofit called the Lucky Finn Project. Hmm. And it was like my mind was blown because I rushed home and looked up that project called the Lucky Finn Project. And at that time, there were over 30,000 people who were just like me with limb differences. And now that group has reached over 70,000 people. Wow. And the sense of, and they had a picnic every year, which was amazing. So there was this sense of, I'm not alone anymore. And I can actually be of help to others because I went to that picnic and I met others who shared my limb difference. But then I also met families and kids who worried about their children. Would they be successful? Would they fall in love? And I could be a role model to those young kids and seeing someone who looked like them. So that representation piece became huge. And so as I started to unhide and talk about this piece, I was in a conversation, and here's where the professional piece comes in, Lou. I was in a conversation in an organization where I was working about diversity. And we were talking about diversity and leadership. And I naively asked the question, do you see me as diverse? And the answer back was interesting. It was at first, well, you're a woman. And I said, yeah, that's a lens of diversity. Because when we talk about diversity, right, we talk about often race, we talk about gender, maybe sexual orientation, and we often leave out disability, the visible and the invisible. And so when I pushed it further and said, well, what about my disability? The answer back to that was, oh, well, we don't see you like that. And it was
and how did they see you?
Right. They saw me as just a white woman. And the disability piece, what I realized, Lou, is I hadn't been talking about my story. I hadn't shared my experience of having a disability. So it was no wonder that they didn't acknowledge that part, because I didn't talk about it. So when we don't talk about things, how can we expect others to acknowledge them?
I've got a good question here. I don't want to miss this part, because obviously, Ruth, in growing up with the limb difference, obviously there were probably some physical things that made it challenging or difficult. Perspective-wise, just talk about, obviously you obviously have managed to get through life with this whole thing with using majority of your right hand. Other things maybe that you've done in your life that, that people wouldn't have known about, like from the physical component of what you've been doing.
Sure. I mean, I think it starts as young as when I was 5 years old. I had to learn. I remember sitting down with my father, and 5 years old is typically when you learn to tie your shoe. Well, my father had two hands. And so trying to teach a child how to tie a shoe with one hand when you've never even thought of how to do that can be challenging. And so I remember literally pushing him out of the way and saying, I will figure this out. And I figured out how to tie my shoe. I figured out how to do gymnastics. I figured out how to ski. All the things that you would think, even to water ski, all the things that you would think you would have to have two hands for, you don't. Right. What you do have to have is an ability to think outside the box. And I think a lot of people who are challenged with whether it's a visible disability or an invisible disability or something different about them, we've often had to think outside the box and be creative with how we're going to get things done. And so that's a big piece of figuring things out.
Want to go back now to the workplace thing and the message that you're giving. And by the way, what a fascinating story of somebody not seeing you as diverse. And here we are in inclusion. And it's rather ironic, I find it, that where someone's seeing you for just who you are from your color, but not looking at the other components, right? It is an interesting thing how even those that are attempting to see things diverse might not necessarily see them as inclusive. And those trying to be inclusive might not necessarily things as diverse. As an expert on this and what you've been seeing, and obviously through the message that you deliver, I want to talk about the awakening, the aha moment that you deliver in your message that is helping people really see and breathe things together. Because what I love about what you're about is the ability to embrace connection, whether connecting with others or other people, to understand the importance of this. How do you share your message, and without giving through all the details of it, in a way that helps to bring that perspective to everyone so they really get the whole message of what really is so important in bringing people together?
Yep. I think there's probably 3 pieces to it. The first is I use my hand as a tool to talk about that diversity. We need to expand the conversation. And I use my hand as that tool to say, hey, here's what's missing from the conversation. The second piece is I use my hand to talk about the idea that most of us are hiding something about ourselves. And when we hide parts of ourselves, we don't really connect with people in authentic ways. And so again, my hand becomes the tool for that conversation. And then the third thing I talk about is that when we unhide, that's the key to connection. It's our ability then to connect with people. And when we unhide, we get to experience joy again. We get to experience our lives again. And so that's the goal when we think about inclusive workplaces, when we think about diversity and inclusion trainings. It's the idea of thinking about, what are we hiding? What are we not? How do we understand ourselves? And I've built out a whole model called the Cure to Inclusion, Lou, which is an acronym for how do we understand ourselves? How do we connect with others? How do we think about representation on our teams and in our workplaces? Whose voices are heard? Whose are not? How do we acknowledge people for their differences? And then the E is for empathy. How do we show empathy and kindness and curiosity? Because the question I get a lot is, well, should people ask you about your hand or not? Should we ask about disability? How do we ask about it? And I always say back is, A, why do you need to know? Is it because you want to be supportive and you're curious out of kindness? Because if it's just about looking at a traffic accident or something and because you want to be in the know, then don't ask. But if it's because you want to be supportive in a curious and kind way, yeah, then ask, and be okay if the person doesn't want to answer. It's okay.
I like it. Single-handedly. Best title of a book ever, for the record, on relevancy in this. I want to talk about your experience as a writer, capturing this message. Share with the listeners here, first of all, what that writing process was like. And then I'm going to let you know that every single author that I've ever had on this show, I ask this question, which is, there's a gift of the book itself that everybody gets to have, the reader gets to benefit from. But it turns out there's a happy accident, and that the author receives a gift in the writing process. Share with everybody what Singlehandedly is about, and think about, Ruth, what was the gift that you received in putting this thing together?
That is a fantastic question, series of questions. I think, and I'm glad to know I'm not alone in terms of this question that you asked everyone. I think the process of Singlehandedly, and let me start there. I had wanted to write a book for years. People, when you say you want to write a book, 2 things happen. A, they hold you accountable because they ask you, oh, where's your book? And the second thing they do is they offer a lot of advice about what your book should be about. And so I toyed with so many ideas, whether it was going to be the top 10 questions I get when I speak, that was going to potentially be the book, to, oh, should it be a book about disability specifically? And what I did is I hired a book coach, who helped me figure out the outline for the book in terms of what was my message I wanted to deliver. And what it came down to for me is I wanted to share my story, because more and more as I spoke, Lou, I heard more and more about people hiding part of themselves. Yeah. There was actually a statistic at one point, Deloitte did a survey that 61% of people hide a part of themselves in the workplace. And this was pre-COVID. So I could only imagine post-COVID what the world would feel like, because many people are hiding behind muted voices and blanked out screens. So what was it? Could I share my journey of hiding and how I learned to unhide in this book. And so that's what the book really started to kind of shape out, is my different vignettes and stories of how I learned to hide, because it is a process and it's a continuum. Hiding to unhiding is a continuum. You can be not hiding part of yourself in part of your life and hiding part of yourself in another. And I mean, for example, I met a woman who was very open about her sexuality in terms of the LGBTQIA residents of her life. And at the same time, she wasn't willing to talk about her education background. And so that's interesting, because you may assume, oh, well, she wasn't going to talk about her sexuality, but no, she was concerned about her education background. So, and people have shared in different aspects as I speak about what they're hiding. So I wanted this to be use this myself as a tool to talk about hiding and unhiding. And what I realized also as I was writing it is, more and more over the past couple of years, the space around DEI has been huge. Yeah. And again, 90% of companies have jumped on the bandwagon or have had this as part of their agenda and have highlighted it and amplified the message around DEI. And yet only 4% of those talk about disability, the visible and the invisible, the mental health and neurodiversity pieces of disability. And so I wanted to include that and the significance of why disability should be included. And it's been amazing as people have read the book. To your point about the gift that the reader gets is that piece of, people take such different pieces of it and say, wow, you've made me think about, where am I hiding in my life? Where am I not hiding? How can I be of help and an ally to those hiding? I think the gift back to me was the clarity about this, like, why was this my life? Like, why was I given this gift to be able to share with people that idea that so many of us are hiding? And it's such a different life when you unhide. So there's a freedom. You're holding yourself back when you hide. And so how do you unleash when you unhide?
I love this. Listeners also need to know that we made a joke before the podcast began, because we had some sound issues on my end, that she said, don't you hate it when you're on the phone and a siren runs by? And of course, a siren would run by in the middle of this interview. For those listeners, my editing team will hopefully do a good job of, muting it in some ways, because I do not want to take away from how powerful your message is. And I do want to ask this question, which I love asking guests on this program, that I think this is not only inspirational what you do, but I think it's so important. I think that from the clarification of what diversity and inclusion is, and obviously in the work that you do, but also this message. And I think, this might be one of the instances. I've said this because I have kids who are in their 20s. As we continue to get older, it seems to be so much harder to be a kid these days. I would ask this question with the sense of people like yourself and helping people to be more inclusive, more diverse, more understanding. You think we're getting to a place that the people who you're inspiring, who have similar disabilities or other limb differences, whatever it might be, are we at a place where maybe it's better for them going forward, growing up in the world that we're in? I'd love to hear your take on that.
I think absolutely there's an awareness that has been raised, especially around disability, but also with diversity. I will share, I think growing up today, and I just posted this week, Legos came out with a limb different character.
Oh, wow.
Imagine seeing yourself I think about it myself. Imagine if I were a little kid, when I was a little kid, seeing that Lego figure and being represented, feeling seen, feeling heard. Imagine me not having to hide. And so I do think we've come a long way in terms of thinking about representation. I think we still have a while to go, because I think we're just starting to think about how do limb differences and disability show up in media? How do differences overall, Lou, show up in our daily digest of media, and how we of the world, how we think about beauty, how we think about love, how we think about connection, how we think about thriving. So I think we have some work to do still, but we're on a track where enough people are utilizing social media in good ways to talk about difference, to talk about disability, to talk about your podcast, Thriving. and thriving so that we can live in a way that we want to be living.
Ruth, I love that you're here, and I love that you're thriving on most days and you're inspiring others to thrive. But like we've mentioned, on some days, we are not always kicking on all cylinders and we're a little off our game. Ruth Rathblott, when you have trouble thriving, what practice do you seek, or maybe which individual do you seek out to get yourself back on the thriving track?
Wow. There's a few things that I do to get myself back on track. As I shared with you right before we got on this program, I was on a 3-week hiatus traveling, because I think traveling is one of the things that I do to recharge and reset, to see the world, to connect with people in different ways, to just see things differently, and to let my mind kind of just absorb things and really let my 5 senses absorb things. And part of that practice when I came home was needing to get motivated for this 2023. And my practice that I use to thrive is one of journaling every morning. And it starts with a breathing exercise, and it starts with a list of 3 gratitudes every morning, because that's a piece of, hey, I'm lucky to be alive. This is borrowed time that I'm on. And my biggest fear, Lou, is I'm going to run out of time in terms of inspiring others. It's not the death piece itself. It's the idea of running out of time. So journaling is one of the pieces that I do. Going for a walk in the park, definitely during COVID, was part of my mental health routine. And so exercise becomes a huge piece of my life. And I think then the other piece is starting to relying on my friends who I can go to. And I also go to my father a lot. And again, I'm lucky that he's still with me because I lost my mom 7 years ago. So I go to my father a lot because I'm lucky for that connection. And I've worked hard at that connection. So family and friends are critical to thriving, especially those who want you to win.
Ruth, let's do the admin part of the show before we get down to Fun Street here on Thrive Loud. Ruth, can you share with the listeners all the places people can find you, websites, URLs, social handles, where they can get the book? We will put it on the show notes, but it gets more engagement when they hear it from you.
Sure. So ruthrathblott.com is the first place I would suggest people going to. That's my website. Then there's LinkedIn, where I'm very active in terms of connecting and talking about unhiding, talking about diversity and inclusion, and talking about my book. And the book is Singlehandedly, and it's learning to unhide and embrace connection. I also did a TEDx talk, which was all about this idea of when I stopped hiding, I found freedom. And I think the other is Instagram. And Lou, I don't know about you, but I had 2 Instagrams going for a while, and I realized people only need one. It was Ruth Rath. That's it. So Ruth Rath is my Instagram, where people can find me.
That's a good one, by the way, for you, Ruth Rath. We were just talking about that. That was the challenge of saying Ruth Rath so quickly. No, I've only had one. It's only been Thrive Lou D or Thrive Loud, whatever you want to call it, for the whole time, because there's too much competition with Lou Diamond Phillips. We don't want to be stepping on all his names and all that stuff. So.
No.
Awesome. All right, so we got that down. We got the admin stuff down. We've got your book. You are here now, as we've been having fun the whole time, but I want to take you down Fun Street. Ruth, I always love starting this section up by asking a fun question. Do you have a favorite movie that you love to watch or rewatch whenever you get a chance?
Wow, that's a good one. You know what? I would say there's probably 2.
Sure.
Mr. Holland's Opus is one. I love it because I love to cry, and there's a good cry in there.
That is. I was about to say, that is, if you want to go bawling towards the end there, you're done. Yes.
It's a good one. And I would say Sliding Doors is the other one that I watch over and over, because it's that idea. And I think about it a lot in my life, especially when you miss a train and you're thinking, well, oh man, if I just left my apartment 1 minute earlier. Well, you don't know what would have happened if you had left your apartment 1 minute earlier. So that whole sliding doors concept is a cool one to me.
It's cool also, if you rewatch it a couple times, because they film it so interestingly, how different the characters look. Gwyneth Paltrow looks. I was going to say Goop. How she looks when she's doing everything. It's pretty cool, actually, that like difference between 2. I like that.
Yeah, you can see her going through her metamorphosis and you know her change. Yeah, and how she lightens up. Mm-hmm.
And kind of how they bring it all back together in a weird way at the end on both is kind of cool too. All right. we're going to do the speed round here, Ruth. I know you can handle this. I'm going to ask you something. I just want the first thing that comes to your mind. These are things that lift you up, motivate you, make you feel good, basically make you thrive. Ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Go.
Of late, a song that you love to listen to, or maybe one that pumps you up.
Wow. Oh my God. You know what comes to my mind, and this is so corny, is Kelly Clarkson's Under the Christmas Tree. I don't know why I'm listening to it. It pumps me up though. And I know I need to get out of the holiday season, but Under the Tree by Kelly Clarkson.
I will say we are recording this in early January. You're hearing this in January. And, Christmas a lot of people love Christmas music all the time, Ruth. It's okay. An activity. Oh, actually, no. I'll go a different way. A favorite food that's not a dessert.
Oh, guacamole for sure. Anything with avocados. That's okay. And spicier guacamole, the better.
A favorite dessert?
Creme brulee comes to mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't had that in a while. I do like creme brulee, though.
I know, especially if it's done really well with the hard shell on the top and then the inside being all creamy, but the hard shell on the top of sugar. Excellent.
Got it. An activity you wish you did more of?
Wow. I would say running. I wish I had more time to run and to really, I think the resolution for this year is moving my body. And so it doesn't have to just be running, but running, I wish I did more running.
An activity you wish you did less of?
Social media. Not the posting, but the hours on that you can find yourself on TikTok and Instagram, just scrolling. And then you look and it's 2 hours later. So I just put a timer on my phone to limit me to 15 minutes a day on social.
I like it. An activity you recently tried that you highly recommend others to do the same.
Oh, I love adventure. So ziplining was one that if you have not ziplined, and that's part of my TEDx and also my book, but because there was a guide who told me that I couldn't zipline with one hand and didn't want to give me the gloves. And yet there was luckily another guide who said, you only need one hand to zipline to pull on the brake. And that feeling, Lou, of flying through the forest and seeing the river below you, that's cool. And I just tried hot air ballooning too, and that was awesome.
Ruth, if I could snap my fingers and you could be anywhere in the world, where are you?
Paris.
Have you been?
Yeah, I just got back. And it was, Paris is one of those cities you can get lost in and just wander and find yourself in an amazing museum, in an amazing park. Everything is perfectly designed and detailed. So I would say Paris. And I also found while I was there, Lou, the 2018 winner of the best croissant. And it was buttery and warm beyond belief. So when you asked about food, I'm like, oh, is that it?
How did it only win in 2018? It didn't repeat another year?
And I couldn't find 19. I couldn't find 20, 21. I'm like, where am I? But you know what? I'll take 18. I'm good.
It's probably still good. Ruth Rathblott, thank you so much for coming on Thrive Loud. Thank you for your message. Everybody, check it out. Singlehandedly, truly an honor to have you on the program. Really great to get your message out there. And thank you for what you do.
No, thank you for having me. And I hope I was helpful to your listeners and hopefully they're thriving loudly like you're wanting them to and like we want them to.
Absolutely. To all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep moving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
On my own, it's on me, moving single-handedly. Moving single-handedly.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Check us out on the web at thriveloud.com and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Thrive Loud. And check us out on the Good Pods app at Thrive Loud, where you can follow, listen, and connect directly to Lou and all of the Thrive Loud episodes. Thanks for listening.